This is the second in a series of 3 videos on the Pikmin series. Last time we took a very long look at the original Pikmin. This time, we're looking at Pikmin 2. As this is the sequel, I'll be heavily referring back to my previous video's main points. This is also just a very spoiler-heavy review. Just take those things into consideration before watching the rest of this. Pikmin 1 turned out to be one of my favorite games of all time, so much so that I immediately ran over to my computer, got onto Amazon, and ordered the next game for the Wii, this time with the amazingly detailed box art. Fortunately, back in the day, fans didn't have to wait very long after the original game was released in 2001 either. It came out late in the year, so it was only about a 2-year wait and some change before a direct sequel came along in early 2004. This new game reviewed very well. However, as time has gone on, it's actually managed to divide the fan base quite a bit. This time, the game boasted even larger environments, new Pikmin types, and 2 captains. But Pikmin already had such an incredible formula. All I really wanted to see from a sequel was better AI for the Pikmin themselves, and maybe some slightly improved controls for the Wii Remote, and a better challenge-based mode. I hadn't even considered the possibilities that putting a second captain on the table might have. All in all, this was shaping up to be a very promising follow-up to one of my very favorite games. But with how split it makes people's opinions, did that turn out to be the case? Well, let's find out, because it's time for a Pikmin 2 long-form review. Oh my god, that rhymed. This game is a lot more ambitious in a lot of ways, and so its opening movie has to explain some longer information. Basically, Olimar's planetary stranding in the first game took place during a short vacation of his. After escaping the planet, he returns home and goes to work immediately, where it turns out his job, Hokate Interplanetary Freight, has accumulated some debt. Like over 100 years' pay worth of debt. The president was going to try to auction off some assets, but it turns out all they have is the SS Dolphin. You know, Olimar's ship that he owns. How'd they even get in that much debt in the first place? Well, our boy Louie was delivering some gold-plated carrots, and they got eaten by a space bunny. So now everyone is screwed. Things start looking up immediately though, when a souvenir Olimar brought back from the planet turns out to be worth 100 whole Pokos. Yes, that is the name of the money, you're just gonna have to go with it. So Olimar is sent back by the president with Louie in tow to scoop up as much treasure as they can find in order to save the company. On arrival though, Louie gets knocked out of his seat, which leads into our first tutorial day. There are 2 this time, oh boy. The first day uses Olimar and Louie's separation to slowly introduce a lot of the same concepts from last time. Olimar whistles the Pikmin to his side and tosses them to get them to fight this dwarf Bulborb. Then Louie is switched to, showing off how to swap between the 2 characters, while also introducing the onion and harvesting pellets. Once the 2 captains are reunited, Swarming is reintroduced to retrieve our first treasure, a straight-up Duracell battery. The second day will give you a chance to do some more combat and harvesting. It teaches you about breaking down walls, and then ends with an introduction to the new caves. This first one, the Emergence Cave, is only 2 floors, introduces some more treasures and the existence of treasures that can grant new abilities, and it adds in the first of the new Pikmin types in this game. After finishing up, you get catapulted back to the surface, and the next day you can start exploring a new area so you can really get into the swing of things. This intro is so exhausting. I probably just explained everything about it in like a minute, maybe two, but it takes almost an hour to really get through because of the darn shit. In the last game, Olimar wouldn't shut up in the tutorial, but at least you could speed through that text if you wanted, and it didn't stop everything for more than a few seconds. In this tutorial, everything comes to a screeching halt whenever literally anything happens. Sometimes it's charming, but more often than not, the game freezes for the ship to do its obnoxious siren at you and then give you a robo-snorky explanation of whatever it's trying to teach you. It never lets up either. Whistle Pikmin, it talks. Meet a Pikmin, it talks. Pluck a seed, it talks. Walk up to the cave, it talks. Collect an enemy, it talks. What happened to Olimar's pleasant introspections from last time? Why isn't he talking? And what's Louie's take on things? Well, it turns out they're both mute in this game, which is a huge step down from last time. The ship, being a robotic capitalist, would make it a great foil to Olimar's personality and Louie's inherent weirdness. I mean, look at him, what a creep. We do get to hear from both characters in the Piclopedia, where Olimar describes the creatures as a scientist and Louie describes how he would prepare them in a meal, which is one of the best features in the series, by the way. But I want to see what the captains think of the treasure they find. I want to hear their thoughts on their expedition. The ship has plenty of personality, especially with all the oddball names it gives to the treasures, but I think it's a bit too one note to carry a 12-hour game. Anyways, that's the tutorial, a middle-of-the-road start to a new Pikmin adventure. I will say I enjoy how each little moment is scored with unique little jingles. But it's paced so slowly and squeezes your hand so much that it knocks the wind out of the opening. Hopefully it picks up the pace, but let's let the rest of the game speak for itself. Oh, dang it, spaceship! Oh boy. Pikmin 2 is what we in the fan industry like to call a pretty quick sequel. Instead of starting from scratch with a new visual and physics engine, the team used the first game's engine and plenty of things like character behaviors and level creation tools as a base and added things onto it. This makes Pikmin 2 immensely polished compared to its rough around the edges predecessor, and it gave them the chance to add a lot of gameplay improvements. They also expanded the new Pikmin universe in a number of ways, making it feel fully realized in a product that out-alives the first game, honestly. I mean, the amount of personality added to this game is brain-busting. UI-related objects like text boxes and save prompts and various progress graphs have been spruced up to the point of perfection, all having bouncy effects that suit the wacky nature of the characters. But what's even better is the amount of ways the characters get to express themselves. Like I mentioned, the ship pipes up a bit, and even though I'd rather hear from literally anyone else during gameplay every once in a while, it has frankly hilarious dialogue. It could have made a great foil, but that's besides the point. Its implications of just pretending not to care and being able to physically feeling things and having unnecessary types of scanners are all LOL moments, as the kids like to say. And the things it names the various treasures you find constantly have me smiling throughout the entire playtime. Other characters besides Olimar and Louie get dialogue of their own. The president, and eventually Olimar's wife and kids, and Louie's grandma send emails that flesh out our main duo's lives and the story at the end of each day. These are all full of flavor and add a lot to the game, allowing for a brief break from the ship's snark between days. If the first game's theme was nature, then Pikmin 2's theme would still be, well, it's still nature, but now the game looks way better. It's prettier is what I'm trying to say. All of the environments are bigger and packed full of more little touches that make this world feel even more lush and full of atmosphere. Lots of plants like a diminishing dandelion. The lighting feels appropriately different in each region, and details like fog blocking out the camera whenever you're near a cave really make this one of the most immersive games Nintendo has ever produced. The world has also gotten a lot more diverse too. All the levels in the first Pikmin felt distinct, sure, but they were all just takes on a general forest theme, with the only arguable exception being the distant spring. Here we have 4 stages, each themed around one of the 4 seasons. The Valley of Repose is obviously the winter one, the Awakening Wood is for the springtime, the Perplexing Pool feels distinctly summery, and the Wistful Wild has subdued fall colors. These aesthetics are all just so beautiful, despite how dated the hardware makes them look. The game just radiates this warm, nostalgic energy that makes me want to live in these stages. Unfortunately, due to the characters being 1 inch tall canonically, I would probably squish all these locations by stepping on them. Plenty of new species and obstacles further bring the world to life. Pikmin 2 has the most creatures out of any of the Pikmin games. Sure, most of them are just recolors of Bulborbs, and plenty of favorites like Wollywogs and Snagrets and the beady Longlegs return, but lots of these creatures bring their own behaviors to the table, and I love all of them. One of my favorites is this shrimp thing that hides in a hole to dive out and grab at a potential meal. You can really get to know all these guys through the Piklopedia, where you can toss pick carrots at them to provoke them to attack, and that's just the best thing ever. I could spend hours looking at every single creature. There's also the treasure hoard, where you can look at the different treasures you've collected. As you've probably noticed, these treasures are all either based on regular household items or are straight up real world products. The Duracell battery, a bottle of chapstick, a Vlasic pickle jar cap, and even Nintendo's old Love Tester, which was a shitty toy they used to produce before they just made video games. All of these make an appearance. This confirms the planet to be a post-human Earth, which, despite the whimsical and beautiful nature of the world presented to us in the game, is very creepy and unsettling in a way. But looking at this stuff doesn't feel too stressful, mainly because the Piklopedia and the Horde share one of the most relaxing tracks in the series. I guess we're getting into the music now, so here's my Pikmin 2 mixtape. The soundtrack was composed mainly by the returning Hajime Wakai, but this time he got some minimal help from Nintendo veteran Kazumi Totaka. Even if you don't know Totaka's name, you know his work, as he worked on the original Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening and Luigi's Mansion prior to Pikmin 2, and would later be the main composer for a cult classic known as Wii Sports. I think the pair did an amazing job expanding on the musical stylings of Pikmin to make an even more amazing whole soundtrack. The main area themes are all fantastic if you ask me, from the Valley of Repose's ambient chimes that make you want to get nice and cozy, to the Awakening Wood's cheery horn section, to the Perplexing Pool's paradoxically relaxing and mysterious arpeggios, to the Wistful Wild's intense pan flute, which is a thing you can pull off apparently. All the core tunes are perfect as you strut around the planet's surface, battling and hunting for treasure. But you know what's even more impressive? The amount of variations has expanded. The last game had an added percussion track for when you were next to working Pikmin or fighting enemies. But now, Pikmin Working has its own section The combat has its own instrumentation, and they added a feature where the captain's taking damage slowly increases the tempo. But they also added my favorite thing ever. When you're playing as Olimar, the songs are played in a standard 4/4 or 3/4 time signature, but when playing as Louis, the time signature is given more of a swingy feel in 6/8 or 9/8. It's not surprising that this score, being made in a pre-Mario Galaxy world, was scored mainly using synths and MIDI programs. I love MIDI scores, as most older games were produced with these means, so that's not a knock on the game at all, but it's doubly unsurprising the soundtrack was produced this way, because doing so allowed them to add all these crazy effects far more easily than if it was recorded live. If any of my subs like making music and you want to use some of the sounds you heard there, the Pikmin wiki found that a lot of the samples can be traced back to the libraries of the Kurzweil K2500 and Roland SC88 synthesizers. I don't actually know how to pronounce those. I don't know if anybody's going to buy them, but I'm going to put the link to that Pikmin article down in the description. I mean, you could probably just look up a sound font too or something, but... Oh, I should probably discuss the cave music before we finish up. It's good in a very different kind of way, because for the most part, it's very amorphous and at times straight up atonal. There are lots of good memorable pieces associated with the caves though. Here's a few of my favorites. In addition to looking and sounding more impressive, the gameplay has seen a lot of helpful tweaks and structural changes that make this game feel a lot more realized. Pikmin 1 is one of my favorite games of all time, so despite all of its flaws and harshness, it was still more than functional in my opinion, but it did need some dewrinkling. Pikmin 2 makes plenty of efforts to do just that, so let's see all the improvements that have been added. For starters, lots of things were changed about the Pikmin themselves, and that's awesome. Last time they were more ditzy than a country hick in a computer store, lots of tripping, slow movement, and just a general lack of responsiveness. But they're way better this time around, often moving more quickly. I could be wrong, but it feels like they're more receptive to desperate whistlings, and newly planted ones even sprout way faster. This can be canonically attributed to Olimar having recently trained a bunch of them, and as a result their general self-awareness being higher than previously, but as a gameplay improvement, it just feels so good to control a far more intelligent species. Leaf ones still lag behind and they still get snagged on corners, but improvements are improvements, and I'm grateful for the effort regardless. There are also 3 new types of Pikmin to take advantage of. I consider it 3 because one of them has been super changed from last time, or should I say supercharged? Should I say that? The yellow Pikmin can no longer carry bomb rocks, as those have been turned exclusively into dungeon obstacles, but they now focus on electricity immunity, making them feel like an entirely different type. They can knock down these electric fence walls and deal with electric enemies. That's a godsend, because for some reason electricity insta-kills any Pikmin that touches it. Who thought that was a good idea? Who thought this was a good idea? The other types are interesting in their own ways, especially in how you get them. The purple Pikmin are your heavies in this game. You use them to daze enemies with a huge stomp, and they can do a lot of the lifting because they have the strength of 10 Pikmin in one body. That means you can also abuse them in combat by using their stomps to stun enemies while also doing crazy damage. White Pikmin are weaker than all the other types, but they do move more quickly, are immune to poison obstacles, and can poison enemies if eaten. And they can use their weird bug eyes to see treasures under the ground and dig them up. These 2 brand new types are great and bring some new type-specific tasks to the table. How they're produced is also of note, as they aren't grown from onions. You can only get them from caves by using special candy pop buds. These Pikmin changing flowers were totally optional in the first game if you knew what you were doing, but here they're the only way to get any purple or white Pikmin. That means if they get eaten, there's no easy way to get them back, so you have to be careful. I don't think that's the most player-friendly way to handle it, but it does feel like a plausible way for Pikmin to come into being. It's interesting, like I said. Oh, and how could I forget the player favorite Bulbmen? Look at them, they're so cute! You can recruit them by killing their more mature Bulbmen captains. They're kind of boring from a gameplay standpoint, as they just exist to give you some extra guys in the caves and are immune to all hazards, making them a get through easier card if you can keep them. They do add to this game's world building though, as they seem to be regular Bulborbs taken over by an unclassified parasitic type of Pikmin, which is a really cool idea. Overall, the new Pikmin types are valuable additions to the team, even if their methods of reproduction make it stressful to use them when they aren't absolutely necessary. Their designs are also fantastic, making them stick out from the original trio without feeling ridiculous or implausible. The idea of a captain standing in for a regular cursor has had a few additions made to it as well. The most notable is the addition of a second captain. Swapping between the 2 of them can sometimes allow you to accomplish multiple things at once, and I stress sometimes. Captains can only do things while you're controlling them. They don't have any AI programming that will allow them to automatically do tasks. So while this feature is extremely helpful while you're waiting around for a wall to be broken down or Pikmin seeds to sprout, I usually found myself just sticking with one captain because I never knew if there was a puzzle that required both captains to be in the same place or not, right around the corner. There isn't even any co-op in the story mode that could kind of explain or somewhat alleviate these issues. At that point, there may as well have just been one captain like the first game. I do appreciate the effort to expand on the concept, as it was already a pretty interesting genre shift. Shifting the idea further is a worthwhile idea, but it needs to be more than just simply having a second character existing to truly evolve it. Sorry, Louis. A great modification to the captains is the post-cave power-ups. Treasures collected from bosses are modified into new items that upgrade Olimar and Louis' abilities. A longer range for your whistle, punching harder, taking less damage, becoming fire and electricity resistant. All of these types of expected improvements are here, and they really make getting through a cave exciting, wondering what regular old things will add to your arsenal. One of my favorite features in the original Pikmin was the day system, a timer over each day that limited how long you could explore an area, which added to the countdown to your doom, forcing you to always be strategizing and going for max efficiency. Now that being said, I can see why, after that game, it would seem more appealing to the developers and to players to remove a strict limit. The timer marking morning to night is still around, but there's no day limit hanging over you. When you go into a cave, time stops, so when you exit, it's still whatever time it was before you jumped inside. All of this allows you to focus more on becoming fully immersed in the world and the dungeon crawling. This therefore goes on to also accomplish making the game more easily longer, since you can take more time to hunt for more treasures. It also brings the moment-to-moment gameplay fully into the limelight, making the game more wholly accessible to new players or players who struggled with the first game's demanding premise. I really enjoy exploring these gorgeous areas, so I'm all good with the time limit being lifted. Yep, no, 100%, no facetiousness on this face right here. We're not coming back to this later. Don't put a pin in this. Another thing I really enjoy is the complete overhaul to challenge mode. This time the mode has its own dedicated stages and there are a lot of them. They are based on the caves though, so I didn't really feel like playing through them all, but I liked the shorter lengths and the tighter pace. Wouldn't you know it, they added a timer, which makes this mode feel closer to traditional Pikmin. The shorter length also makes them a lot easier to replay for a better score, and it actively rewards you for doing better, which I really like. If I was super into the cave gameplay, I would probably love this mode, but regardless, it is better than the last game's challenge mode, so I guess by definition, I got what I wanted. Good job. I was going to talk about the 2-player battle mode, and I was really excited to record it too, because I was going to sit down with my friend Dave and battle it out. Unfortunately, I'm a total dork dweeb and left one of my nunchucks at home, so we couldn't even play the mode. I'm sure it's a ton of fun though, I'm just not in a position to have a good opinion about it. All of the changes I mentioned do a lot to improve a lot of the main gameplay, which makes just sitting down to casually enjoy a session of Pikmin 2 feel really enjoyable. Unlike Pikmin 1 though, which was short enough that any huge issues didn't ruin a whole playthrough because you were so close to the end, Pikmin 2 tries to add a lot of changes to make the game feel more worth full price, I guess. A playthrough of Pikmin 2 can run you anywhere from 12 to 20 hours, which is about twice as long as the longest possible Pikmin 1 playthrough at its shortest. So problems really start to feel like big problems. The kinds of issues where the more you have to put up with them, you just have to ask, why? Why is this like this? Why is this in here? For example, I mentioned the new Pikmin types in the addition of a second captain. Although I really like the new types, they have caveats. They can only be gotten in caves, which means if you aren't careful, you can lose them for long stretches of the game with no way to easily recover from your mistakes. Heck, the Bulbmen are only temporary, even though plenty of Bulborbs can thrive on the surface. Why are these guys limited to the caves? Why isn't there a purple and white onion? Or why aren't the candy pop buds on the surface to help you recover from screw-ups? Why isn't there some kind of gameplay balance that makes you able to take some Bulbmen out of the caves? The answers to those questions are intertwined with the world itself, so they aren't immersion breaking, but I often found myself wondering why you couldn't discover onions in the caves or something. And don't even get me started on the issues combat has in this game. With the purple Pikmin, if there's no elemental hazard on an enemy, that stomp will knock them out and pretty much auto-kill them. The new types raise more gameplay questions than answers. Same with the two captains mechanic. I just talked about the issues with it, but still, it's a great idea that leads to enormous flaws across the whole playthrough. But another thing that really gets under my epidermis about it is how they added a system that theoretically would allow you to be more efficient in a normal Pikmin game, but it's rendered as pointless as a sphere because of the absolutely beaten up day system. And they only really had to invent a second character as a result of this game's awful story. Yeah, welcome to the Angry Drew part of the video. Why does the story suck? Well, in addition to Olimar and Louis and the president getting shushed so the spaceship can be on screen as much as possible, I just don't like how it sets up a continuation. Olimar just worked so hard to escape a dangerous alien world so he could get back to Hokate and see his family again. And all of his effort gets rewarded in this game by having his newly rebuilt ship sold off for a little profit, and he doesn't even get the chance to reunite with his family before getting sent right back to the planet. I thought I was playing Pikmin 2, not Exploitative Capitalist Corporation Simulator 2004 Game of the Year Edition. The storytelling may be bad, but as a justification for the gameplay, it works out rather well at first. The game celebrates how much debt you've recovered over time. Every 10% milestone gets a big fanfare building up to the 10,000 Poco goal. It's really gratifying, it was a big motivator, but then the post-game gets going. Once you recover all the debt, Olimar takes off for Hokate with all the treasure, but he leaves Louis behind on accident. The credits humorously show Louis just kind of hanging out in his new environment, but after the credits, the president of Hokate Freight decides to go back with you to collect the rest of the treasure and try to maybe find Louis, probably for liability purposes, and this is where the game really gets going. Not only are there the treasures in each area to hunt for, along with any caves you haven't taken on in those areas, but there's also a whole new area unlocked, the Wistful Wild, which has its own treasures and 3 brand new caves. So there's arguably more to Pikmin 2 after the credits than there was before them. That sounds great at first, but it just becomes more and more of a slog. One of the biggest reasons for this is that it stops celebrating your progress. You're not getting treasure for any reason anymore. You're just wasting your time collecting it for no reason. And once I realized that, I really just had no reason to play anymore. Every second spent in the main game after the credits rolled was the longest and most agonizing part of my life, and that's saying a lot. It doesn't help that the day system and caves were wearing me thinner than I already am on their own. The day system is such an afterthought here, and it really only feels like it's still here because it was in the first game and because it aesthetically helped with the nature theme. With no day limit, that means that the number of days you spend on the planet doesn't matter, which means the amount of time you spend exploring doesn't need to have a limit on it. You don't need the time hanging over your head and interrupting you every 13 minutes or so, you just don't. But they kept it in anyway. Any efficiency-focused decision making, which was so important to the first game's success, is now also out the window. Having 2 captains does help make the game less boring sometimes, but it doesn't matter that it can help you do things more quickly when you don't need to do anything quickly. And picking the right team for the job hardly matters either, since it really only needs to be done as pre-cave prep. There's a couple ways I can see this being improved. One way that would be a huge expansion would be nighttime exploration, so you could still have your in-game days measured for some sort of purpose, but the game wouldn't need to interrupt you for no reason. Another way that you could implement a day limit system, but in a way that would feel less daunting, at least from my perspective, would be to have incremental limits for each chunk of debt. Like, for example, the game would give you 5 in-game days to achieve the first 10% of debt, then you would have another 5 days to reach 20%, and so on and so forth. If you wanted to make the game even less stressful, you could let any leftover days stack. Like if you got to 10% in 2 days, you could keep the remaining 3 days and get 5 more to reach 20%. Then maybe in the post game, to keep it from feeling exhausting, you have your remaining amount of days, which would probably be a lot, and you get 10 or 15 more to rescue Louis. Then there would be a concrete goal in sight, but your limit would be more lenient and therefore more accessible, like Nintendo was probably trying to achieve in the first place. But instead, we have a huge mechanic that doesn't work because they got rid of one crucial piece. I think the poor handling of the day system also ties into why I don't really have much to say about the level design. Like, I think all 4 of the areas look really great, and I think they're really well put together, but without features that encourage you to really get to know them and efficiently clear them, they just feel huge and slow to get through. Again, they have memorable parts and they're designed really well, but Without the day limit and without actually useful dual captaining, they're just giant land masses that feel too big. But at least they're big and open. I can't really say that for the caves. That jingle is supposed to inspire curiosity, but it makes me shiver with dread. The caves are a concept that is unique to Pikmin 2. I know a lot of people really enjoy them, but the same reasons people like these things are probably the same reasons I hate them. Alright, okay, enough beating around the bush. Let's jump into it. So caves essentially introduce dungeon crawling into the game. That means a lot of the real-time strategy is done before diving into these things, as you can only bring whichever Pikmin you already have with you. You'll use each type to clear out elemental hazards and enemies, collecting a majority of the game's treasures, diving deeper and deeper before facing a boss at the end and rocketing back up to the surface. Time completely freezes in these areas, meaning you literally have all the time in the galaxy to complete the dungeons. This can be kind of fun when you're still getting used to it, but the longer the game goes on, it becomes more and more tedious. One of the main issues is that the caves are just too long. The number of floors is really demanding and should really have been dialed back. This is compounded by the sheer difficulty of these things. The devs were not on the player's side one bit making them. They'll drop you into floors with a bunch of tough enemies clustered all together. Rocks and bombs fall from the ceiling, which I guarantee you'll lose some soldiers to just because you can't see it coming. They made it super easy for your Pikmin to get chucked into a bottomless pit. All sorts of craziness. This is where the issues with combat come in. I think they ramped up the toughness to counteract the purple Pikmin, but also because they probably felt there needed to be some balance to the ultra spicy and ultra bitter sprays, which make your Pikmin stronger and turn foes into stone, respectively. So they tried to fix a huge problem by just slapping one band-aid on 3 disgusting wounds. And sure, it does save after every floor, so you can just reset as many times as you want, but that doesn't help when the caves are just so bland aesthetically. They all look distinct at first, but the more of them you explore, the more you realize there's only a few graphical templates: dirt caves, rusty pipes, a toy box, etc. There are some rooms that break the mold and look quite nice, but the main parts of the caves all look really samey. They did try to make it feel less so by randomizing enemy and treasure placements, which even affected me whenever I set up a retry for myself, but the differences were never big enough that I thought the randomized elements were worth including. It's a non-mechanic. Maybe they could be fixed by turning them each into shorter, more tightly designed, challenge mode-esque levels. I also think it would be interesting if some floors had these sort of temporary onions, which would help the caves be more forgiving and balanced, as well as adding more strategy as you carefully choose which Pikmin types to replenish. But regardless, I just don't enjoy the caves as they are now. They wear me the fuck out. I was going to try and suffer through the Dream Den, which is often considered to be where the story really concludes as you rescue Louie here. But once I got to the 4th floor, I really just couldn't take it anymore. And I was gonna reset and tank through it, but I realized that my hatred for all this stupid spelunking wasn't gonna vanish. I already know how I feel, and if I'm not having fun playing something, then it's a waste of my time. I think this is the most angry script I've ever had to write, but hopefully I didn't come across too angry. I really tried to front load this script with things I love about Pikmin 2, because it's just such a polished sequel in so many ways. How it feels to control the Pikmin and explore the areas has been massively improved, and a lot of the new mechanics introduced are cool to toy around with. The longer the game goes on though, they really start to become huge issues. Really, the moment-to-moment exploration starts out making the game more fun than its predecessor, but because of the structure making the game longer, harder, and having things that just don't need to be there, the game has more than enough time to wear out its welcome. This game was released only a couple years after the first Pikmin, which means development probably started not too long after that first game was released. So I think at the end of this whole journey, Pikmin 2 represents a project that was just a big misunderstanding. There wasn't any real way that the team could really know what made the original Pikmin so great and special, and in their attempts to make the game more massively appealing, they accidentally dropped the ball. They lost the spirit of Pikmin. That sounds so cheesy, but I really don't know how else to phrase it. There's a lot of things to admire here, there really are, but you have to wallow through a whole nasty swamp to see it all. Join me next time when I take 9 years to release my next video, thus requiring it to be a soft reboot that will later need to be put on a better platform to have any chance at success. Also, I'll be talking about Pikmin 3 Deluxe. I hope I'll see you seeing me.